Okay, so I've got some title ideas for the next Spider-Man film. That's great. Can't wait to hear them. Well, you know how every one features some play on the word home? I think these are gonna be right on brand. Well, then go on, let's hear them. Picture this, Spider-Man Home Wrecker, where Peter cheats on MJ. Oh, wow, well, that's upsetting because they just got together and they're not married. And they don't have a home. I hear you loud and clear. How about this? Spider-Man Homebound. Peter Parker develops terrible agoraphobia. Pretty hard to fight crime when you won't leave the house. People know who he is now. Maybe it makes him nervous. Well, I guess that makes sense. What else were you thinking? How about this one then? Spider-Man Home on the Range. It's a Western. Gunslinger meets web slinger. Ooh, dangerous and sticky. I like it. All right, well, how about you try this one on for size? Spider-Man Home Alone, where instead of using his spider powers, he instead sets creative traps using everyday household objects. Eat paint can, Hobgoblin. Oh, and then finally we have one that I know you're gonna love. Spider-Man Home for the Holidays, a non-denominational celebration for the entire family. Well, I'm sold. Call up the boys. We've got ourselves something to announce at Comic-Con. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, using our theorist tingle to dispel all of Mysterio's illusions. And let me tell ya, between fake restaurants, fake Mysterios, and fake Nick Furies, I was tingling all over the place while I was watching Far From Home. Probably should get that one checked out by a doctor. But seriously, I felt like I couldn't trust anything. The ushers were in there trying to pry me out of my seat, and I'm like, no! I feel the barf drones around me. You're all just trying to make me think the movie's over, but we're still somewhere in Act 2. Long story short, I'm not allowed in that theater again. On the plus side, I left Far From Home with a heck of a lot of theory fodder. So today I'm tackling a theory that is so speculative, it's more hypothesis than theory. I know, blasphemy. But coming out of the theater, I couldn't get out of my head, and I thought it was a cool topic to talk about on the series. You see, the most important part of Far From Home isn't so much what's in the movie, it's instead what's coming after the movie. Far From Home isn't just another step in Marvel's stairway to box office heaven. It's clear that this movie is acting as an inflection point between where we've been and where we're going. A gateway to the post-Endgame era of Marvel, where everything is suddenly being called into question, from your leadership to your very identity. And as a part of that, I'm here today to predict Spider-Man's next major role in all of it. Because at this point, the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies have tipped their hand just a bit too far. I think they've revealed just a wee bit too much. And as a result, I have a solid hypothesis as to where things are headed for the old webhead in the next feature film. So book your tickets now, ladies and gentlemen, because Spider-Man's next opponent will be a massive showdown with the Sinister Six. For those of you who might not be familiar, the Sinister Six is a team consisting of a number of Spider-Man's nastiest villains. Can you guess how many? Usually a massive team-up of supervillains would be something that would develop pretty late into a comic's career as they figured out how to come up with new exciting storylines for the same character. But when it comes to the Sinister Six, their beginnings actually start as far back as the beginning of Spider-Man comics themselves, back in 1963. And since that time, there have been no less than 24 different versions, which have had names like the Sinister Six, the Sinister Seven, the Sinister 12, the Superior Six, the Hexagon of Haters, the Six Most Sinister, and the Six Men of Sinistry. That Hexagon one was a joke, by the way, but it's not like you could tell, right? This group's gone through more reboots than the Spider-Man movies have. But in all seriousness, me standing here as my virtual cutout saying that the films are gonna feature Spider-Man's most iconic villain group probably isn't gonna be setting the world on fire. So instead, let's get even more specific by picking out who exactly those six characters are gonna be. That would be a little bit more impressive, right? I mean, I need to do a lot of making up for past failed prediction theories, so nailing the 6 major villains for Peter P's next outing in a movie that hasn't even been announced yet would be tight. Over the course of Marvel history, there have been over 40 members of the Sinister Six, which leaves us with a lot of villain options to slot into the group. It's like the popular frat of the comics. Everyone's rushing to get in. Luckily, I don't need to rely on my usual prediction methods. There have been plenty of solid hints sprinkled throughout the series. If we rewind back to Homecoming, by the end of that film, we've already met 50% of the crew who will be heading up this new version of the Sinister Six. The first and most obvious inclusion is Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, who may have been kind enough to preserve Spidey's secret identity in prison,
If I knew who he was, he'd already be dead.
But now that the whole world knows the truth, all bets are off. Toombs has got himself an axe to grind. It's also worth noting that the Vulture is an OG member of the Sinister Six. The original 7 iterations of this group all featured the Vulture prominently, so not including him when he's already an established part of this cinematic universe would be a big surprise. And that's not all. In Vulture's crew, we have ourselves a brief passing reference to yet another classic Spider-Man villain, the Shocker. In the MCU, Shocker isn't much of a supervillain, but instead he's just a sucky salesman who fires off Vulture's illegal rockets in public and attracts the attention of Spider-Man, which in turn makes Vulture realize that old Sparky is too much of a liability and needs to be let go in the most violent way possible. Well, initially it looks like Vulture's just turned the Sinister Six into the Fearsome Five. He quickly replaces Shocker with a new Shocker, quite explicitly passing the torch.
Here. Now you're the Shocker.
I don't think that's just a throwaway line there, friends. It's brief, and it's one that's easy to write off as just a tongue-in-cheek Easter egg, but remember, we saw a similar series of events become the major plot twist in Far From Home, where a bunch of smaller characters that had been set up via past movies suddenly emerged to the forefront to become major players. So the Shocker having a similar reveal in the third Spider-Man movie? Oh yeah, it is definitely precedented. And not only that, but Shocker is indeed a canonical member of the Sinister Six in the comics. I mean, practically everyone is, but still, he's there, usually as a member of the expanded Sinisters, like the Sinister 7 and the Sinister 66. You heard that right, 66. Here I thought Infinity War had a lot of characters. So anyway, that is 2 villains right there in the first movie, but we can keep going. There are a couple other tertiary villains that we see running in Vulture's crew, but I'm more hesitant to count on these guys because they rarely appear in the Sinister Six, and they just don't have the same level of name appeal. Specifically, I'm referring to the Prowler, played in Homecoming by the childish Gambino himself, Donald Glover, and the Tinkerer, who is worth the mention because, well, if I didn't, you guys would light me up in the comments thinking I missed him. I didn't, he just isn't interesting enough to make the official counted squad here. Which then, of course, brings us to the end of Homecoming. Here, the Vulture goes to prison and meets Mac Gargan. If that name doesn't ring a bell, the tattoo on his neck certainly should. A scorpion. Looks like Mac is carrying on the grand tradition of arthropods in this franchise by taking the role of the Scorpion, a guy who traditionally has a giant tail that shoots acid. How the more technology-centric films will make this attack strategy less awkward is up for debate, but there's no doubt that he's going to be joining forces with Toombs. In just his brief scene alone, it's immediately established that he's also after Spider-Man and wants to team up. So to recap, at the start of Far From Home, we know that both these baddies are still in prison together, and the new Shocker is still floating around out there somewhere too, giving us a solid lead on at least 3 out of 6 Sinisters. Let's see who else is gonna surface in Far From Home. In the beginning of the new movie, Peter and his friends just got themselves blipped out of existence for 5 years by Thanos. The very fabric of reality's been shaken. Whoopsie! But no worries, the Avengers figured out that pesky time travel business, and now everything is back to normal. With everyone now completely acclimated to aliens and magic, and Tony Stark destroying huge sections of major cities, it turns out to be the perfect place for Mysterio to enter the fray. With the world willing to believe literally anything at this point, Quentin Beck and his organization of background players from all the past movies decide to create their own superhero. A soldier from another universe, Mysterio. And if there was ever a superhero slash villain perfect for the internet age, this guy is it. He's fake, he only does things for the clout, his entire reputation depends on everything being on video because if there was indeed a true Avengers level threat, Mysterio would just be flat out useless. In short, Mysterio would just make a great YouTuber. That would be funny if it wasn't completely depressing. Anyway, chalk Mysterio up as another core member of our new Sisterhood of the Traveling Sinisters. Now, I know the first thing you're gonna say, but we saw Mysterio die at the end of Far From Home, which yes, is absolutely true. I totally think Quentin Beck is dead, despite my best efforts in researching for this episode to prove otherwise. But in Far From Home, we're very clearly shown a shot of his team taking the computers and drives that retain all of Mysterio's files. I mean, think about it. They were pulling the Mysterio shtick before they got control of Edith. Edith just enabled them to do it at a bigger bigger scale. And throughout the movie, they very intentionally show Quentin Beck and Mysterio separately. Mysterio is just a projection, a drone of what this superhero suit looks like. So not only can Mysterio come back, that sort of plot line is also canon in the source material. Mysterio's original plot in the early days of the Spider-Man comics, starting back in issue 13, is pretending to be a good guy, exposing Spider-Man's true identity to J. Jonah Jameson, and then faking his own death, which, wouldn't you know it, all happen to be the key beats we see him do in Far From Home. So we should consider staying true to his comic book origins and remember that he was also an OG alum of the Sinister Six, taking part in the first 5 iterations of the group, taking a break for 6 and 7, and then coming back strong in 8 and 10, meaning that Mysterio is taking up our slot number 4. Now, from here, our job gets a little harder, because we have to get to villains that we haven't directly seen yet, but ones that I think the movies are definitely setting us up for. The first open slot I think will take advantage of Marvel's newest playthings, the Skrulls. Captain Marvel was keen on showing off the Skrulls and how well they're able to infiltrate the ranks of normal humans, but it was odd to see them also show up in Far From Home, a story they seem pretty disconnected from. Why would Marvel be showing us this now, at this point in the movies? Well, I think it boils down to 2 reasons, both of which go back to that inflection point I was talking about at the beginning of the episode. First, they know that Spider-Man is and will always be their biggest hero. He's Marvel's equivalent of Batman. I mean, sure, Iron Man was big for the movies, but Spider-Man is just iconic. He was big before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He was big before Iron Man really changed the superhero scene. So if the Skrulls are gonna play a big role in the future of the MCU, they need to be introduced to mainstream audiences who may not have seen Captain Marvel through a more mainstream movie, a Spider-Man movie. So there's your reason 1. But there is a second and more relevant reason that applies to our theory today. You see, there just so happens to be a Spider-Man villain with a very Skrull-like power set, the Chameleon. He's a shapeshifter who's able to disguise himself behind the face of whoever he wants. In fact, the Chameleon was Spider-Man's first ever villain, introduced in Spider-Man #1 way back in 1963, and barring some fan theories, he's never actually appeared on the big screen before, which leaves the pathway totally open to bringing him in via shapeshifters that we already know exist in this universe, the Skrulls. So all you would need to slot him into the Sinisters is a Skrull gone rogue, one with a chip on their scaly green shoulder. That's not just speculation. We may already have him identified. Many fans believe they've already spotted this guy in the MCU right here, the guard who's sent to surveil Peter while he's in Europe. It's a small detail, but his name is Dmitri, and wouldn't you know it, but that exact name, Dmitri Smirnikov, is the exact identity of the Chameleon in the comics. Give this man a pledge pin, ladies and gentlemen. He is our number 5, which leaves us with one last slot to fill. And honestly, it could go in any number of really cool directions. When it comes to the Spider-Man movies thus far, the MCU has had a habit of tricking us. They know we know these stories and characters. That's what happens when a hero gets rebooted so frequently in such a short amount of time. So to keep us off balance, they're, to borrow a phrase from the show that must not be named, subverting expectations. They're reinventing or reimagining the good and bad guys in ways that we don't expect to keep everything fresh and new. Aunt May isn't old. MJ doesn't stand for Mary Jane. And Peter's biggest bully, Flash, isn't a typical jock, he's just an even bigger nerd. In much the same way, there are villains creeping around here that we may not even see coming. For example, you remember one of Peter's relatively unmemorable teachers back in Homecoming? Well, her name is Mrs. Warren, which could be a name picked totally at random, or it could be that she's a reimagined version of Miles Warren, Peter's biology professor starting in Spider-Man 148, who ends up becoming one of the Sinister Six villains, the Jackal. A villain, mind you, who goes on to clone Peter, his dead girlfriend, and his dead parents in a plotline that wasn't super well received by comic fans, but still, she's there and waiting to be swiped right on. So go ahead, Sinister Six, take a chance. It's also been pointed out by others that Spider-Man's been seen battling the Manfredi crime family, leading us to believe that the comic book villain Silvermane, who's associated with that family in the comics, may also be floating around along with a whole slew of his accomplices. There are plenty of other Easter eggs like these, and they might materialize down the line, but here's the thing, none of these guys are cutting the mustard for me. Up until now, everyone we've talked about we've either seen before, like Mysterio or Vulture, or as just a backup player, like Shocker or Chameleon. We need a big name. We need a major player. The Sinister Six needs its new lead singer, its headliner. We need ourselves either Doc Ock or, more likely, the Green Goblin. And of the two, I think the Green Goblin is all set up and ready to roll out. Not only is the Green Goblin one of the most frequent members of the Sinister Six, but because the Goblin is usually a member of the Osborn family, who are tech billionaires just like Tony Stark, they tend to have ties to most of the other villains in the comics, and likewise in the new cinematic universe where technology is fueling a lot of these characters' powers, they would have connections in that realm too. The Osborn technology would help supplement what the Vulture's doing. The Osborn technology would help supplement the Mysterio gang. The Osborn technology would help make the Shocker stronger. But now let's go back to something I said earlier about subverting expectations. Remember Flash, the nerd bully? He is very clearly being set up for a future plotline. Throughout the movie, there's this ongoing thread about his relationship with his parents, a weird text message thread with them, and that one scene when they return home and he's met by their driver. In both scenes, Flash is being ignored by his parents. They're absent. They've forgotten about him. It's also clear that they have a very formal relationship, with Flash having to call them father and mother. It's very similar to the way that Harry Osborn reacts with his father Norman Osborn in most other Spider-Man stories, including the Sam Raimi movies.
Peter, may I introduce my father, Norman Osborn?
Flash's family is also very rich.
Technically, this is my dad's car, sir.
Just like the Osborns. Heck, it's even been suggested that those super rich Osborns are busy building Oscorp's new headquarters in the old Avengers building, which you can see being constructed in Far From Home. But I know what you're thinking. He's Flash Thompson. He's not an Osborn. And you know what? That's just what I thought too. That's what literally every fan wiki online says, but it seems like literally everyone has been jumping to conclusions here, because at no point in the movies do we ever hear Flash's last name. He is never once called Flash Thompson. Not once. It is always only Flash.
Matt?
Even right here in the credits, he's only listed as Flash.
Matt, seriously, you might want to stop.
That right there is our smoking gun. Loyal theorists, the big twist, the way our expectations are gonna end up being subverted in the next Spider-Man movie is that Flash's last name is gonna be revealed as Osborn.
Matt!
What? I'm building up a good flow here. You're throwing off my dramatic reveal.
Well, here's a more dramatic reveal for you.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's not in the script or the credits, but...
Yeah.
Well, why didn't you tell me earlier? Because even if he is Flash Thompson, there's a very real chance that he could have been just adopted by the Osborns. That sort of angle would have support from the comics. In the story, Norman Osborn takes Flash under his wing, gives Flash a job, makes him feel like part of the family, and ultimately turns him against Spider-Man, who he was formerly idolizing, just like we see Flash idolizing Spider-Man in Far From Home. So there you have it, friends. We got ourselves our 6 villains: Vulture, Shocker, Scorpion, Chameleon, Mysterio, and Green Goblin, all set and ready to go. But to close things out here, I think I'll put myself even further out on a limb. I think it's worth pointing out that there's one villain in this group who is different than all the others: Vulture. Vulture is very clearly established to be a family man.
I built this whole place because I got people I have to look after.
He's not about world domination or being a renowned superhero. Heck, he doesn't even want to attract the attention of the Avengers.
If you bring damage control or the Avengers down here, we're through.
He's not in it for the clout like Mysterio. He's not in it for revenge. He's only in it to take care of his wife and his daughter. The same daughter who Spider-Man saved at the end of Homecoming, and who then went on to rescue Vulture himself during the final battle. We already know that Vulture wouldn't give up Peter Parker's identity to Scorpion, and we know he has at least half a dozen opportunities to finish him off during that final confrontation and doesn't. So when faced with the option of teaming up alongside a bunch of villains who are bent on world domination, well, he might initially go along for the ride. It's my prediction that Vulture will instead defect, to instead protect someone who shares his values and goals, someone who still appreciates helping out the little guy, the local neighborhood. In the end, Vulture is gonna be the one to end up protecting Spider-Man against the rest of the Sinister Six. Anyway, that is more than enough speculation and fan fiction for the day. I mean, I'm already trying to make calls on a movie that hasn't even been announced to exist yet. Let me slow my roll a little here. Regardless of how it all plays out, I'm excited for this third installment in the Spider-Man franchise. I actually love these movies. They are some of my favorite in the MCU, and whether you agree or not, I hope you liked watching and theorizing about where things go next, because it's a superhero movie. It's all just for fun, just like this is all just a theory. A film theory. And if you want to see more Spider-Man content, check out this video on the left where I analyze the physics of Spider-Man's deadly web slinging, turns out that Spider-Man should have died multiple times over, regardless of his super strength. Or while you're here, make sure you click the button on the right to subscribe. I've got an upcoming theory on which Spider-Man would win in a battle royale of Spider-Man. Make your predictions now, friends. That theory is coming up in the near future. And with that, I'm off. Next week, let's take a break from superheroes, shall we?